Remember Suella Braverman, one of the biggest cheerleaders of Israel in the British Parliament? Now we are beginning to learn something truly shocking about her and possible reasons for her frantic support for Israel both inside and outside Parliament. Braverman was paid £28,000 for a 4-night trip to Israel between March and April this year. £28,000. That will not be even somebody's annual salary in this country. That's how much she was paid by an Israeli Jewish lobby group. Now, also joining her to that trip was her husband, who she has previously described as a proud Zionist in the past. According to the register of MPs' financial interests put together by British Parliament, a London-based Jewish lobby group whose name is National Jewish Assembly and whose address is Suite 12, 116 Ballards Lane, London N3 2DN. That lobby group paid £1,000, hold your breath, £1,000 for flights for Braverman and her husband, and close to £27,000 for accommodations, meals, and visits within Israel only for 4 days. Israel is no India or China or even Russia. It's smaller than even Scotland. So I'm trying to understand where she would have spent £27,000 during her 4 nights of stay. She was on this luxury trip to Israel between 31st of March and 4th of April. By this time, she was already sacked by Rishi Sunak as the Home Secretary. However, something interesting started to happen in the Parliament. The frequency and intensity with which she began to bat for Israel in the Parliament gained momentum. Don't take my word for it. I never say anything without evidence. Here is the list of evidence. On 15th of April, she rose in the Parliament to ask a question about Israel, but reminded everybody that she had just come back from Israel. So she was referring to her trip to Israel. The purpose of her question was the Iranian army, the IRGC, to be proscribed as a terrorist organization.
2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, I was in Israel at the northern border with Lebanon. And of course, we've all seen what happened this weekend. But since October the 7th, Iran-backed Hezbollah has fired over 4,000 rockets into northern Israel, displacing over 150,000 Israeli civilians. I met some of those families. They're under siege, they've been uprooted, but they are brave and defiant in the face of terrorism and anti-Semitism. Mr. Speaker, we have known for years that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is the world's chief sponsor of terrorism, funding and promoting terrorist plots, radicalisation and hostage-taking both in the Middle East and at home. Mr. Speaker, we have proscribed Hamas. We have proscribed Hezbollah. Prime Minister, why don't we put the UK's national security first by now prescribing the IRGC?
On 29th of April, she once again referred to her same Israeli trip in Parliament and asked her own government to stand with Israel if and when the rogue regime of Benjamin Netanyahu launched an attack on Rafah. We all know what happened when Israel finally attacked innocent civilians in Rafah. Refugees' tents were set on fire, babies' heads were blown off, and over 1 million people were forced to displace themselves into the wilderness once again.
Suella Braverman.
Speaker, I was in Israel earlier this year and met with senior IDF personnel who assured me that they are doing everything within their power, working with allies to increase aid to Gaza. It's the right thing to do. We must continue those efforts. But what's also patently clear is that Hamas is obstructing the distribution of aid within Gaza. Another reason we need to support Israel to defeat Hamas. Will the Minister assure the House that if and when Israel goes into Rafah, where we know that several Hamas battalions remain, senior Hamas operatives are based. The UK and the hostages, thank you. The UK support remains resolute and steadfast as we support Israel to finish this job and eliminate Hamas.
On 7th of May, she made another desperate intervention for Israel in the parliament, asking for assurance from her own government for unconditional support for Israel.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I met with survivors of the Nova Festival massacre. I met with people who had fought single-handedly for hours in Israel on October the 7th against brutal Hamas terrorists. Mr. Speaker, we all want peace. We all want to see the end of civilian fatalities, but sometimes countries must fight for peace. Israel has a right to defend herself and a duty to protect her people from the brutal terrorist cult of Hamas. Minister, will you confirm that the UK government will maintain steadfast and resolute support for Israel as she finishes the job to eliminate Hamas from Gaza?
On 16th of May, she was fighting with a young girl over ongoing university protests against Israeli genocide.
One of my first questions that I was very keen to ask, I mean, were you at the encampment?
The Cambridge one, but other ones.
Other ones, okay. And can I ask you what your view is of the events of October the 7th? What do you think happened on October the 7th in Israel?
Well, obviously the camps haven't started because of October the 7th specifically. Right. They're starting, I mean, this week in loads of encampments up and down the country. They've been celebrating and having to memorise the fact that this week commemorates the Nakba, which took place 76 years ago, which means catastrophe, which is a massive symbol of what Israel has been doing for the last 76 years. This isn't about October the 7th. And to start with that is just entirely disingenuous, I think, on your part. I really want to say that I think it's great, actually, that you went to that camp today and tried to talk to those students. And you kind of embarrassed yourself, I would say, whilst doing that, because it was a reminder for me, and I'm sure for other people watching, that actually the Palestine movement brought you down, and the Palestine movement has the potential to bring down lots of other Tory ministers and the whole Tory government, and not just the Tory government, I would say any government and any mainstream political party that is backing what Israel is doing right now, which is a genocide.
On 22nd of May, Rishi Sunak announced the date for the next general elections and Parliament ceased to function. I wonder what she would have done to bat for Israel if the Parliament was still in session. This is our politicians for you. Replace Israel with any other nation and see the public outrage for such shameless support for a country amidst a raging genocide. A regime which has murdered more than 40,000 innocent civilians, with nearly 70% of them being women, children and babies. By the way, she was paid a whopping £28,000 for a solidarity trip to Israel in relation to 7th of October attacks. The so-called solidarity trip 5 months after the actual incident. That's it from me now. Thank you for your support on buymecoffee.com. Your continued support for fearless journalism is absolutely crucial. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.